Merry Christmas, guys. Cheers to 2024, which is just around the corner. My wife made me some hot cocoa. That's very good. And yeah, I'm very, very grateful that we still had a Christmas even after the investment of the Baja 1000. So one of the bits of damage that happened to the truck is a bent frame. The frame is bent in 3 unique areas. 2 of them are in the front, 1 of them is in the back. Which one is in the back? This right here. This is a section of tube that is not really mounted to race spec roll cage tubing. It mounts to the roll cage a few feet in front and mounts to the spec roll cage a few feet in the back, and a bit of tubing actually mounts to the top of this particular tube right here. It's not race spec tubing. It was a kind of tubing that I used in my wheeling days when I did my rear coilover conversion. So that's actually the reason why I didn't terminate the roll cage at this point. It's because I didn't really know what spec it was versus what I was using in the rest of the car. So I went past it. Fortunately though, even that tube didn't fail. The box tubing did. This axle pushed up into the Hydro bump stop and overrode it. Probably after the suspension failed in the rear. The suspension took a beating. This is the bump stop that was on this side, and the Delrin spacer and the aluminum cap are gone, broken, destroyed. And when the suspension moved, as in the mounts failed on the frame side, the whole axle was twisted. Twisted to the point where my bump stops did not contact their plates that were on the axle. So if you've ever wondered why you need reinforced frame mounts for your control arms, whether it be front or rear or bottom and top for your trailing arms, this is why, to stop things from moving. These bump stops probably would not have gotten damaged if those things had not failed. Why would a rear shock mount, or why would the rear bump stop fail? I mean, even though these ends got chewed up, this actual component did not. Its frame mount did. It was pointing inwards. How did this happen? I don't know, I wasn't there. Happened after my time. I've got speculation, and to be quite frank, this is all going to be in the speculation zone from here on. I'm just looking at what failed on the rear of the truck and imagining how it could have actually earned that damage. So, as we are racing, it is a good rule of thumb to never back up on a race course if you can avoid it. Usually if you're backing up, it's because you've hit an obstacle that you can't overcome, or you have reached a other vehicle that you would actually drive into if you drove forward, so you back up and reverse. Both very reasonable things. Think about it though. If you're in a situation where you're backing up because someone else is stuck, bets on it's an obstacle that's much longer than the car that's stuck. So this is what I imagine occurred, okay? The suspension mount on the other side collapsed forward, as in it was pushed this way. The control arm did the pushing. It wasn't squished by a rock. It wasn't twisted by hitting an obstacle itself. It was physically metal pushing through it, and that made that mount bend. So, right here, see how that has been pushed very hard to the right? Well, this crack, this tear on the outside is indicative of this getting forced this way very, very hard. So you can see the whole thing is flexed out pretty bad. Even collapsed on this side. Very unfortunate. See this rubbing right here? This is a rubber or polymer rubbing hard to remove all of the coating. So this was relatively in line with the edge of the tire when I took it off, but it was several inches away. So the truck has axle wrap. Because of the panhard in the back, it'll swing one way to the other, which means this control arm could probably be very close to touching, if not touching, the wheel at flex once this thing failed and pushed out more to the side. The reason why I say that this was a organic material like that rubbed that, is because it's relatively smooth, and I have an example of something else doing the same. Something synthetic, something rubber, something non-metal doing that. Let me show you an example where we did use that. You see this winch line right here? It got rubbed on pretty hard, right? Look at the damage that we earned with the upper control arm after the spindle failure. When we lashed the upper and lower back together with the winch, we took off all the powder coating and rubbed a lot of red on there. And this rash is relatively similar to the rash we have over here. That makes me think this was from a tire or something like it. So, tire comes in, it's pushing this. This is all flexed down that way. And if it's flexed at a hard angle, okay? By the way, you can see how that suspension member got moved a little bit as well. If the whole axle is flexed out hard down and hard up, well, imagine this axle, now that it is not aligned with the bump stop. See this cut right here? This little U hole? That matches the radius pretty darn well. So if this is caught, okay? If this is caught by the suspension now that it's moved, and now the suspension is pulling it inwards, now it'll take the frame and do this to it. How do we fix that? Well, tried bonking the frame with hammers. That did nothing. And I realized or remembered that this bend was because of the mount, right? All of the torque was being induced through the mount of the Hydra bump stop. So you could use the bump stop to push it back into place, and that's what I did. It's now back in line to within about 1/2 degree, which is super freaking cool. So it all lines up with the axle again. And how did I do that? I put a blank of steel inside of the bump stop mount, heated up the material around it, and whacked this with a hammer. You can see that that tube is collapsed on the one side from my impacts. Getting that out is going to be kind of a chore. But how did I do that? Literally took a 9-pound. You know, full force whams, probably like 20 of them. And with a little bit of fire to heat things up, made that go right back into place. So that is one part of the frame fixed. How do we prevent this frame from failing again? How do we stop it from being a problem? Well, speculation aside on how all this stuff failed, especially with that cut off of the bump stops mount, I need to make sure that none of the welds here have cracked. If none of those have cracked, then I don't have to weld repair that. All of the TIG stuff looks fine. The MIG stuff definitely lost some paint. So that's the stuff I need to really check. I'll probably do that with dye penetrant, Magnaflux even. And if it's good to go, it stays. But I am not in a race class that requires the frame to stay stock. I could reinforce the frame. And because the frame has failed once already, it will fail again under much lower force than the original. It's work hardening or overstraining the material, fatigue even, just wearing it out more. So welding plates to this to reinforce it, great idea. The inside did not fail, the bottom didn't even fail. Like it buckled in a tiny bit, but as soon as we sent this back forward, it sprung back to right where it should be, which is super cool. But all of this needs reinforcement now. And I might as well do it to the other side. It'll probably be a L channel, just angle iron, or a higher strength piece of material. Heck, I would even love to be able to bend it. Take this form, bend it, weld it, and reinforce this part of the frame. That comes with the expectation or assumption that I am going to keep the suspension setup that I have in the rear. And to be quite frank, I might not. Suspension in general is the holy grail of any off-roading that you do. I mean, it is of any road racing you do as well. There's always a give and take, a trial and error, something to learn about the suspension. And if it is cost effective to do so, why not upgrade it? So we have a new possible sponsor for 2024 who might help us do just that. What are some of the biggest limitations of this truck? The wheelbase, and then the suspension setup. The truck is set up as a double wishbone suspension in the front. It is 4-wheel drive. I want to maintain that, so I can't just throw super fancy long arms on there that are like outside of the regular realm of long travel arms, because they all have to match the same mounting points to make the 4-wheel drive work. If I wanted to get really crazy, I mean, I could just ditch all that stuff and just keep it a 2-wheel drive, but I really used 4-wheel drive a lot while we were in the race. It was kind of cool. Thomas, my navigator, and I, we would be driving along, going fast, going hard, going through obstacles, going through silts, just driving wisely. And as soon as we thought we would need 4-wheel drive, I was shifting into it, and we were telling each other, go into 4-wheel drive or go into 2-wheel drive, stay into 2-wheel drive, stay into 4. 4-wheel drive really was a luxury when we were off-roading. When we were racing, it was amazing to have 4-wheel drive. It was like a cheat code. We were seeing cars get stuck left and right, and we just dug through around them. 4-wheel drive was just that good. It didn't go fast, but it was good. I want to maintain that. But wheelbase, the other thing that we were talking about, the distance between the front wheels and the back wheels is something that is a sore spot with this truck. It qualifies as a short wheelbase 4x4, as in class 3 of SCORE's race code is for short wheelbase trucks. I'm not required to stay there because I was a sportsman's truck. There's really no reason for me to keep this spot in the truck if I am going to be upgrading the suspension to something much more robust. Something not like this 5-link. If I'm going away from this 5-link, and the sky's the limit on what we can do with it, right? So what can we do with it? I have frame for the next like 3 or 4 feet beyond this thing, and I have a fuel cell back here. If I want to do anything with this, I don't have much room to go more aft, more to the rear with my axle, unless I move the fuel cell. The fuel cell setup is actually designed to be moved, so that is an easy thing to rework and change. So we might just do that. We might just redesign the whole rear end to be a longer track or a longer wheelbase. And if that's happening, what else can we do to improve it? A wider axle, to have the rear axle actually match the track width of the front. The truck would drive so much smoother right off the bat. One of the biggest drawbacks of long travel suspension with off-road cars, like what you can buy commonly off the shelf, is that the axles in the back are skinnier than the front, so you hit the obstacle twice. You drive over something with the front, and that will make a track that ideally your rear tires follow. I didn't get that luxury. Every time that we would hit something, the front track width was so much wider than the rear that there would still be silt or sand or more rocks in the way for the back to hit. If we just got that wider, well, that would make the truck drive smoother. If we could push this back, we could drive faster and safer. There's a big question about that though. If the axle is going back and if the axle is getting wider, are the shocks now in a good spot? I mean, they're up, they're well protected, but they're not really in a good spot. Anytime that the suspension is on top of the axle, it's kind of unstable. If you can go outboard and down, now it gets a lot more stable. If the axle's going this way and the coilovers are coming out and the track width is coming out, why should the coilovers be attached to the axle at all? Couldn't they be attached to another arm? If you're imagining this with a trailing arm 4-link setup, yes, we are talking about that. I am talking about that with potential sponsors. We might just make this a little more race car and a little less 4Runner in the process of making it better. We'll see though. That's a lot of money. And I got to figure out how to make that revenue work. So if you would like to be a part of our adventure, my team's efforts into tackling off-road racing with a well-loved family car, please, we'd be honored to have your sponsorship and advertise for you in this realm. I'm Nate from Good Man Racing. I will see you out in the desert, if not my garage. Like and subscribe for more. And Merry Christmas.